Our first Satan is Hadad Ha'adomi. Hadad the Edomite. I don't know if we read our verse. I guess we haven't. So let's go. I don't know. Can't remember if we read it or not. Maybe we did. We'll read number 15 and 16. Yes, we did read 14, so we'll read 15 and 16.
ויהי בהיות דוד את אדום.
Vayhi bihiyot David et Edom. When David was with Edom. Now there is some, you can read in the commentaries, I haven't chased this for this video, but there is some suggestion that maybe this should be a kaf, which would be, and when David was attacking Edom rather than was with Edom, but the context is attack. So let's just go back because it's too long since we saw this here. So Adonai, okay, Vayakem Adonai Satan. So Yahweh raised up an accuser or an opposer, an adversary for Solomon, and he was Hadad the Edomite from the descendants of the king who was in Edom. It was when David was with Edom.
ויהי בעלות יואב שר הצבא.
Ba'alot Yoav Sar Hatzava, when Joab was going up, Joab Sar Hatzava, Joab the captain of the army, David's army, went up.
לקבר את החללים.
Lekaber et hahalalim, to bury the slain. Okay, those had fallen in battle.
ויח כל זכר באדום.
Vayach kol zachar be'edom, and he attacked every male in Edom. Okay? And we'll do 16 and we'll look at this.
כי ששת חודשים ישב שם יואב.
כי ששת חודשים ישב שם Yoav. For 6 months, Chadash is new or new moon. Here is month, okay? Chodashim, there's an O sound. Ki sheshet chodashim yashav sham Yoav. For 6 months, Joab remained there. Yashav, he sat there, he remained there.
וכל ישראל.
V'chol Yisrael, and all Israel.
עד הכרית כל זכר באדום.
Ad hechrit kol zachar be'edom. Ad hechrit, so karat, to cut off. This is Hifil form, Hifil Qatal. You got the hey there with the hirik, and they got an IE vowel there. Until he had cut off kol zachar, every male be'edom, every male in Edom. Okay. So altogether, we have our 3 verses here. First of all, vayakem. So we talked about Satan, but let's look at this first word here. What form of verb is this? So this is a little grammar break here. If you don't like grammar, just skip it, go to the next section. Vayakem, what form is this? Okay, is it a katal? Is it a yiktol? So perfect or imperfect? Wayyiqtol. How does Ross put this here? Vav consecutive plus preterite, participle, imperative, infinitive. What form is this? Well, clearly it's a Wayyiqtol, right? It's a vav consecutive plus preterite. When we see a Wayyiqtol at the beginning of a new section, this is beginning a new section in our chapter 11. We should check and see if it makes sense to link it with what came before, because the Wayyiqtol is usually consecutive. Usually it's the next event, right? So if we go back, this is from the previous video, chapter 11, just the immediately previous verses here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is the place where God says, where Yahweh says, Karoa ekra et mamlacha me'alecha. I will most certainly tear the kingdom from you, okay? God is going to punish Solomon. because of his idolatry. All those wives he brought in over all those years, and all the gods that came with that, and how he treated them, how he put them in Jerusalem, and maybe rationalize it as he was trying to make Yahweh bigger than them or something like that, more important than them. You can look at the other video to see that discussion. So punishment is coming. Discipline is coming. And this here, the Wayyiqtol here, is indicating that this is linked. This is now the beginning of the punishment. Walsh talks about this. He's the one that actually pointed it out to me. I probably would have missed it. See, the problem with this is we just translate it as a past. And we don't think about what kind of past this is. Vayakem. Yahweh raised up a Satan for Solomon, right? What if it was an X-Qatal? Hakim would be the Qatal. It could have said, the Adonai, we could front Adonai, the Adonai Hakim Satan. Now Yahweh, that was Yahweh who raised up a Satan, or maybe we want to put Satan first. We could do different things with different verbs, but this one is a Wayyiqtol. The grammatical form, the Wayyiqtol is what he's talking about, makes the statement here the consequence of what preceded it, thus implying that this story about Hadad begins the punishment God decreed in verses 11, 9 to 13. So the punishment doesn't just begin with Jeroboam, where the kingdom actually splits. This is indicating the punishment this is part of the punishment. Even though nothing was said earlier about external enemies. Hadad and the next guy we're going to see, there's two stories in our passage today. There's Hadad, and then we're going to get Rizon, who's in the north. So both of them are externals. It doesn't say anything about God going to bring externals, but this Wayyiqtol hints at the fact that these are part of God's punishment here. Wayyiqtols are interesting when they start a passage. Leviticus starts with a Wayyiqtol. In fact, in Hebrew, that's the name of the book, Wayikra, right? It's a Wayyiqtol. Vayikra el Moshe, and he called to Moses, Vayidaber Adonai elav me'ohel moed lemor, and Yahweh spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, and on it goes. Very interesting beginning here. You start without even an explicit subject. It's not till you get to the second line, you get Adonai. So literally, he called to Moses, and Yahweh said to him. It's intriguing. And why is there Wayyiqtol? Well, because that is a Wayyiqtol there. Does the beginning of the book of Leviticus connect to the end of Exodus? Well, perhaps it does. If you go to Net Bible and you look at their notes, they talk about it, and commentaries talk about this. So when you see a Wayyiqtol, check and see if it connects with what came before, even if it's at the book level. Now, Numbers also does that. Okay, this is Numbers. We have a Wayyiqtol at the beginning. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe. Yahweh spoke to Moses. B'midbar Sinai. This is where we actually get the name of the book in Hebrew. Actually, it's Bamidbar. Bamidbar is what we have here, I think. Bamidbar. Anyway, Yahweh spoke to Moses in the desert of Sinai, Be'ohel Moed, at the tent of meeting, Be'echad HaChodesh HaSheni, on the first of the month number 2, okay, the second month. There we have Chodesh. We had Chodashim before. Here's Chodesh, month, single month. Bashana HaShenit, in the second year, L'Tzeitam Me'eretz Mitzrayim, in the second year that they came out from Egypt, Lemor. Okay. Now, does Numbers connect to to Leviticus that came before it? You can take a look in that Bible, see what they say. They say it doesn't. Okay. So just because there's a Wayyiqtol doesn't mean we have to woodenly assume that it's always consecutive. There are times when the Wayyiqtol is not consecutive. But if you see it, check and see. And I think here in our passage it makes sense. So that's a little bit of grammar on Wayyiqtol. I should have put that in my preview notes there. I didn't do that. What else can we say? Okay, Hadad, our first Satan. His name means thunder. His name, meaning thunder, is a common name for the fertility god known in the Bible as Baal. We get that from Gus there. So, name of their god, Hadad, Baal. In verse 16, here's where we have that Piel I mentioned. Okay, Baalot Yoav Sar Hatzava, when Joab went up, Joab the captain of the army went up, lekaber et halalim. Okay, et halalim, when he went up to bury the slain. So Kogan says about this, to bury. The infrequently attested Piel form of kiber, okay, is intensive, buried in masses. So let's compare that with an example in the cow. So this is cow, this is Piel. This is from Genesis 50. Vaya'al Yosef likbor. So we have likaber. We see the doubling there, and we got the typical vowel things that you would vowels that you would expect for a Piel. Here we have an infinitive construct, same form, in the cow, kibor, likbor, et aviv. So Joseph went up to bury his father. Vaya'alu ito kol avdei Pharaoh, and all the servants of Pharaoh went up with him. Ziknei veto, the elders of his house, the elders of the house of Pharaoh. V'chol ziknei eretz Mitzrayim, and all the elders of Egypt. So it's the end of the book of Genesis. They're going up to the promised land to bury Jacob in the same place that Abraham was buried. They're burying one person here, right? Likbor. Here they're burying many people. Likaber. So the difference between the Kal and the Piel, in the Piel, you have this intensification. You're not just burying one, you're burying many. And that is one of the uses, or one of the patterns, I don't know how you want to express this, one of the ways that Piel can be used, or that some Piel verbs are. Let's put it that way. It's not the only use of the Piel. There are other uses, and some we just can't label. But intensification is one of them, and here's an example of that. Another one, shavar is to break, shiber is to shatter. In our third verse, 16, Kisheshet chodashim, for 6 months, Yashav Sham Yoav, Yoav remained there, V'chol Yisrael. So the whole country, the whole nation of Israel was there with Joab for 6 months? No. All Israel is the whole of the Israelitish army. Okay, this is Keil Delitzsch. It says 1996, but they wrote in the 1800s. Okay, so that's why we have this English a little bit different for us. So Keil Delitzsch is saying all Israel here refers to the whole Israelite army. And this happens frequently. When you have a context where it's the army doing something, it'll say all Israel or something like that. They're not talking about the whole nation. They're talking about all of Israel who was there in that context, and specifically the fighting men. Keil Delitzsch, if you haven't encountered their commentary, it's really good. It's older, so they're dealing with some issues that we don't necessarily deal with, or at least they're interacting with people that we don't necessarily know. So some of the discussion can be a bit difficult because they're interacting with people that we don't know, or that we don't commonly encounter today. But they're very perceptive, and it's free. You can get it on the web in various places. So you can get it with eSword, and it interacts very detailedly, in a very detailed manner, with the Hebrew text. So Keil Delitzsch, do look at it. Don't miss that resource. Likewise, so we have all Israel here. Ad hechrit kol zachar be'edom. Until he had cut off, Joab, every male in Edom. Did he exterminate the entire male population in Edom? Same thing. Keil Delitzsch again. Every male is, of course, only the men capable of bearing arms, and I would say who was in that battle, or who was fighting them, who fell into the hands of the Israelites. For Hadad and others fled, and the whole of the Edomian race was not extinct. Okay, so again, it's within the military context. And this is an example. Keil Delitzsch, they are quoting someone, clericus. I don't know who these people are, but sometimes they discuss, they oppose, or they interact with other people, and you don't really know the full context of what they said. So that's where the discussion can be a little bit difficult in Keil Delitzsch. But if you just skip those bits and get to what they are saying directly, you'll find a lot of profit in Keil Delitzsch. Verse 17, what happens next?
Vayivrach Hadad.
Vayivrach Hadad. Hadad fled, and Hadad fled.
Hu va'anashim adomiyim.
Hu va'anashim adomiyim. He and Edomite men.
Me'avdei aviv ito lavo Mitzrayim.
Me'avdei aviv ito lavo Mitzrayim. Edomite men from the servants of his father went with him to go to Egypt. Okay? So, who fled? Hadad fled. He and some Edomite men from the servants of his father with him to go to Egypt.
Vahadad na'ar katan.
Vahadad na'ar katan. And Hadad was a young lad. Okay? It could be a child, it could be a teenager, not quite sure, but he's not fully grown up. You may have noticed when I read it, I didn't comment, but you may have noticed Hadad versus Hadad. Okay? Very close, obviously. This is that Aramaic bit, and this coming from Kogan. The name Hadad is anomalously, I always want to say anomalously. Okay, it's anomalously written Hadad here. Normally it's Hadad. Substituting the E-Semitic form for the Aramaic Hadad. So Hadad is the Aramaic form. That's what they would have used, presumably, and that's the name for their god as well. And Hadad is an East-Semitic form that's translated, or that's substituted here. So you got a bit of a mix there, but that's a little bit of Aramaic here in his name. Verse 18.
Vayakumu mimidian.
Vayakumu mimidian. And they arose up from Midian. This is Keil. That means they arose themselves up. It's not Hifil. Hifil would be Vayakimu, I think. Vayakimu. And they raised up someone, raised up Satans or something like that. This is Vayakumu. They rose up themselves from Midian.
Vayavo'u Paran.
Vayavo'u Paran, and they went to Paran.
Vayikehu anashim imam miparan.
Vayikehu anashim imam miparan, and they took men with them from Paran. Okay, so went from Midian to Paran, and they picked up people in Paran.
Vayavo'u Mitzrayim.
Vayavo'u Mitzrayim, and they went to Egypt.
El Paro melech Mitzrayim.
El Paro melech Mitzrayim, to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt.
Vayyiten lo vayit.
Okay, these were all plurals. Vayakumu, vayavo'u, vayikuhu, vayavo'u. Okay, they. Now we have vayiten, he, that is Pharaoh. Vayiten lo bayit. And he gave him, Pharaoh gave to Hadad, house. I'm just going to say house for now.
Velechem amarlo.
Velechem amarlo, and food, he said to him, he commanded to be provided for him.
Ve'eretz natan lo.
Ve'eretz natan lo. So Hadad gets a good reception, right? Pharaoh gives him house, so like, let's just like room and board and land, right? He gives him not just a single house, even though it says house here. He's got a whole bunch of men, right? A whole bunch of people with him. So he gives him a place to stay. He appoints food. Let me see what the English here. Appointed him food, okay? So he said food, meaning he told people to do this, right? He appointed him an allotment of food. It's like an allowance. And he gave him land. That means he's going to stick around. That means he's going to grow things. He's going to feed himself at some point, maybe as well as food. It's time to look at a map and see where these places are. Where is Midian? Where is Paran? Where is Edom? Okay. But before I do that, I just want to talk about this map. So this is the first of the books I want to introduce to you. Other than Keil Delitzsch, I should have put that on there too. Keil Delitzsch is good. Go check it out. This is the atlas, and this is the New Moody Bible Atlas of the New Moody Atlas of the Bible by Barry Beitzel. And this particular map is a map of the Exodus. This is what the cover looks like. Here's the reference, and this is the ISBN if you want to search it out. You can go to Christian Book and find it, or Amazon or whatever. I have the older version looks like this. This is, let me just get mine. This is my version here. Hold this up. It's the glare is on there a bit. Kind of beat up. This book is the atlas that Gus Conkle had us get in my first semester of Old Testament studies. So this is the earlier version. It is honestly the best Bible atlas I've ever seen. What I like about it is that it has color. Some maps are so drab. It has color, but it's not garish. Some maps, especially digital ones, they have color, but it's just like really bad contrast, really saturated colors. They have a really good artistry and lots of detail. And in the book, you also have, it's not just maps, right? So there's an example. You've got the conquest. You've got a whole bunch of copy, a bunch of writing about the events, and then a map that pertains to it particularly. And there's tons of them. It's a great atlas. I had asked, actually, I had, and I have their maps digitally because they're in BibleWorks. And I wanted to use them in my videos here. So I emailed the publisher and said, I'm making this video series, this vlog, can I use your maps? And they said, which ones you want to use? I said, well, I don't really know. I'll just find out as I go. I said, sure, go ahead. Use any of them. Just make sure you credit them. So thanks to Moody, we're able to use these great maps. And so I'm pointing you to it. And again, this is not a paid advertisement. This is just because I really like it. And because they have graciously allowed me to do this. So let's look at this map. We start out, Vayakumu min Midian. They left, or they rose up from Midian. Okay, Midian is ostensibly here. Maybe it's up here a bit. It's kind of vague in this region here. Here's Edom. So they're coming from Edom, and they're somewhere down here in Midian. Then they go to Paran. Paran's over here somewhere. Again, we don't know exactly. So they go from Midian, from Edom to Midian, and they go to Paran. And that's where they pick up people. And they go to Egypt. Now, Egypt, I intentionally pointed here because I looked up the time frame and where the capital was. And according to Wikipedia, it's here in Tahpenes. So this was probably the area where they went to go see Pharaoh. They went to the king of Egypt. Kogan talks about this here. This bit here, where they took some men with them from Paran and came to Egypt. Vayikahu anashim imam me Paran, vayavo Mitzrayim. His comment is, this is a realistic detail. Guides familiar with the territory were hired to help them cross the desert. Okay? You don't just willy-nilly go yourself if you don't know what you're doing. Only the general direction of the escape route can be sketched. From Midian in the east, where they had hidden, ? So they could well have hidden there, right? They left. David or Joab was attacking the whole area. They were under siege. And so they escape. And they're probably hiding in Midian. The party after Midian, the party headed west through Sinai to Egypt. Their first stop was Paran. Though known from the stories of Israel wanderings in Sinai, Paran cannot be pinpointed with any accuracy. It may be a general name for the southern deserts, i.e. the Sinai Peninsula down here. Okay, so they go from Edom to Midian to Paran. And they need guides to get through this. Notice also, so that's historical information, right? Historical and geographic information. Kogan is really good on that. He has a lot of really good detail. He's good on a bunch of stuff, but he knows his stuff on the history and the geography as well. But there's also another lens through which to look at the text, and that is a literary lens. How did they design this? How did they write this? What is the artistry? Notice we have all these Wayyiqtols, right? Wayyakumu, Wayyavo'u, Wayyiqahu, Wayyavo'u, and then we have Pharaoh, Wayyiten, with a couple of Qatals, X-Qatals there featuring these. Walsh, who is more of a literary critic, he's got a literary eye, he says, the account of Hadad's flight, though only one verse long, this verse here, contains 7 short coordinate clauses. They set out, they came, they took, they came, he gave, he assigned, he gave. The impression the Hebrew wording conveys is almost of a forced march, moving relentlessly from one point to the next. It's borderline poetic, right? Hebrew narrative can often, it isn't poetry technically, but it's very close, it's very carefully scripted. And all these, especially these short ones here, bang, 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 it's just like boom, boom, boom. At least that's what he notices. You may disagree, you're free to disagree, but it is an interesting observation. Verse 19.
וימצא הדד חן בעיני פרעה מאוד.
וימצא הדד חן בעיני פרעה מאוד. Hadad found chen, that's grace, that's favor. B'enei, in the eyes of Pharaoh, in the eyes, in the opinion, the assessment of Pharaoh, ma'od, very much. Hadad found much favor in the eyes of Pharaoh. Let's see how they do it here. He found great favor in the eyes of Pharaoh, okay? Not just a little favor. Pharaoh was very open to him and just welcomed him in.
וייתן לו אישה.
Vayiten lo isha, he, that is Pharaoh, gave him, that is Hadad, a wife. Okay? He's already given him bayit and lechem and eretz, right? House, the room and board and land. And now wife. And which wife is it? Who did he pick for a wife? Just some random Egyptian?
את אחות אשתו.
Et achot ishto, the sister of his wife. Okay? Pharaoh is really drawing Hadad into his family. Here, my wife's sister isn't married. Come and join him. Join us in our family.
אחות תחפנש הגבירה.
Achot Tahpenes, the sister of Tahpenes, so that's the name of the Pharaoh's wife. Hagivira, the mistress, the lady, something like that. Which Pharaoh? A little side note, again, historical, we're turning to Kogan here. Which Pharaoh was this? You might be interested. Verse 18, the verse that is previous, I won't go back to it. When Hadad first arrives, Kogan says, based on the assumption that Hadad was an infant, which may be a bit stretching it, who knows? He may have been a young child, may even been a teen. But anyway, based on the assumption that he was an infant when he arrived and that he married and had a son, by the time David died, which we'll find out in a few verses that David dies when he has, or he leaves when David dies, he leaves Egypt. The time was around 990, okay? And the reigning pharaoh at that time was this guy, Amenemope, I guess. I don't know how to pronounce Egyptian names. Now, verse 19, he says, Hadad found much favor with Pharaoh, our verse here. A later Pharaoh, not Solomon's father-in-law, he says, is this one here, perhaps Siamun. So, I don't know if he's right, but he sees there's enough time there where it's at the overlap of reigns that we have 2 pharaohs. If he's correct here, actually you can go to Wikipedia. This is in the 21st dynasty of Egypt. Wikipedia is great. They have all kinds of Egyptian detail. And they have a picture of this fellow. Okay? This is a funerary mask of the 21st dynasty pharaoh Amenemope. Probably butchering that name. So a funerary mask. That means after he died, they took this very fine gold and they put it on his actual face and produced this. So you're looking, it's really kind of awe-inspiring when you think about it. You're looking at what may have been a 3D image, a holograph in modern terms, of the pharaoh that received Hadad 3,000 years ago. I find that kind of thing interesting when you think about what you're actually looking at there. Okay, so that's perhaps two pharaohs there. Tahpenes, I may have been saying Tahpenes, is apparently a Hebrew transliteration of an Egyptian word meaning wife of the king. Okay, and this is coming, so Gus Conkle was saying this, but others have as well, and he's getting this from Kenneth Kitchen, who has done a lot of work in Egyptian history and comparing it to the Bible. So this is the transliteration, meaning whatever the Hebrew phrase was for this would have sounded the same, and they just put it in Hebrew letters. So wife of the king. So maybe it was more of a title. Maybe it was a title and a name. Not quite sure. But the one who is married to the king. And we know that because it says Ishto, the wife of, or the sister of his wife, Ishto, the Pharaoh's wife. And then we have this here, Hagivira, the lady, okay? Achot, so the one that married Achad is Achot Tahpenes, the sister of Tahpenes, who is the Hagivira, the lady. In modern Hebrew, Givunat is a way of saying miss, like Mr. and or Mrs. or whatever. It's a formal designation. Here's very similar, Hagivira. Now, let's look at 1 Kings 15, which we'll come to eventually when we get there, a few chapters down the road. We get this as well in our text in Israel, talking about someone in Israel. V'gam et Ma'akah imo, and also Ma'akah his mother, vayesireha megivira asher asita mifletzet la Asherah. A bit of a mouthful there. So also Ma'akah, his mother, and we're talking about Asa here, okay? We're talking about, I think I have a picture there. Yeah. So we're talking about King Asa, third generation or third son, great-grandson of Solomon. Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa. So this guy, this king of Judah, he set aside from being the Givira, he set aside his mother, Maakah, from being the Givira, because she had made a disgusting thing to the Asherah, some sort of pagan thing, a structure, an idol of some sort, for the shrines of Asherah. Vayichrot asa et miflatzta, should pronounce that final hay there. So he Asa cut down her disgusting thing, her mifletzet, vayisrof benachal Kidron, and he burned it in the wadi of Kidron, okay, in the Kidron Valley, the Kidron Wadi. So here the Givira is the king's mother. Here the Givira is the king's wife. So it's probably more of a general term, and it seems to be a title. Certainly it is here. He didn't kill his mother. He dethroned her from her position. Her position, he set her aside from being the Givira, okay, because of these things that she had done. So here it refers, or here the queen has that position. Here the queen mother has that position. So it's not really queen. It's more like the leading lady, maybe. First lady. And it was his mother here, and it was the queen here. Okay. Verse 20.
ותלד לו אחות תחפנס את גנובת בנו.
ותלד לו אחות תחפנס את גנובת בנו. She bore for him, who did? Achot Tahpenes. Okay, so the sister of Tahpenes. How does he say it here?
ותלד לו אחות תחפנש.
Tahpenes. Okay. Vateled lo Achot Tahpenes. So Achot, the sister of Tahpenes, who's the wife of Hadad, we don't know her name, which is always referred to as the sister, Achot Tahpenes. So she bore for him, or to him, for him, Hadad, who et Givunat beno, a son whose name he was given Givunat. Okay.
את גנובת בנו. ותגמלהו תחפנש.
Vatigmelehu Tahpenes. This is to wean, weaned him, and she weaned him, and who's the subject? Tahpenes. And Tahpenes weaned him
בתוך בית פרעה.
betoch bet paro, in the midst of the house of Pharaoh. So, Givunat has received house, food, land, wife, now a son. Okay, some time has passed for all this to happen. A son, and it's not just he's living off in his house separate from Pharaoh. The son is weaned. It means he's growing up in the house of Pharaoh. And who weaned him? I think this means more than just stop breastfeeding, okay? Who weaned him in the house? Not Achot Tahpenes, it says Tahpenes, the queen, the sister of his wife, right? So the queen mother, the wife of Pharaoh, has taken Givunat under her wing in the midst of the house of Pharaoh, and he's growing up in the house of Pharaoh. Pay attention to how this is writing, right? How this is written.
ויהי גנובת בית פרעה.
Vayhi Ginuvat bet paro, and Ginuvat was in the house of Pharaoh.
בתוך בני פרעה.
Betoch b'nei paro, in the midst of the sons of Pharaoh. So he's growing up in the house of Pharaoh, and then it says it again. He was in the house of Pharaoh, and he was among the sons of Pharaoh. So he's just shoulder to shoulder with the sons of Pharaoh, who are, one of them would be heir to the throne. So Givunat is, when it's said that he received chen me'od, he really received chen me'od, right? Great favor. Givunat. So Givunat is the name of this son that was born. Why might Hadad name his son Givunat? So to look at that, we need to look at what Givunat means. We have a verse, a short, tiny little 2-word verse in the Bible, Lo tignov. Do you know what that means? Do you know what tignov is? Can you guess? Lo tignov. Well, this is from Exodus 20, verse 15, for the 10 Commandments, and it is thou shalt not steal. Okay? The same root, ganav, that we have here in his name, Ginuvat. Okay? Ganav is a thief. Geneva is thievery. I think it's the abstract noun. Ginov, Tignov is the Wayyiqtol, and Ginuvat is what he's named. So why might Hadad have named his son? It feels passive as well with the u there. I don't know, it's a noun. Stolen. You name your son Stolen. Why would you do that? Philip Ryken says, he named his son Ginuvat in Hebrew, which means to steal, taken from the Hebrew verb ganav, possibly to serve as a constant reminder of the kingdom that had been taken away from him. Remember, he's in exile. Things are going great, but he is in exile. He's not with his own people in his own land. He bided his time in Egypt, a bitter victim nursing a hateful grudge, while he gathered his power and waited for the day of his revenge. Philip Ryken is a literary type of guy. His commentary is quite literal, or quite literary, not literal. And so he's paying attention to this. I mean, other people would too, of course. His father was Leland Ryken at Wheaton. He was the English professor. So Ryken, I'm sure, was very sensitive to how stories are written, and he grew up with that, I'm sure, in the house. Over dinner table, they're probably talking about narrative theory. So he is now actually the president of Wheaton, and he's written this commentary in 1 Kings, Reformed Expository Commentary. and it's quite a literary one. It's kind of like Jerome Walsh's commentary. Ian Provan, who is deals a lot with history. He's at the Regent College in Vancouver, British fellow. Also, really important writer in evangelical circles, in the Kings and the historical material. He says, we do not need the hint of his son's name, Ganav, to steal, to realize, however, that this is a man likely to be very angry indeed about the stolen lives of his countrymen and unlikely to want to stay forever in Egypt, right? So, what was stolen? Kingdom, land, lives, and who did the stealing? Well, David, Joab under David, right? So, even though Hadad is doing well, he is waiting his time, it seems. And he hasn't forgotten, and we see that hint in how he names his son. Verse 21.
והדד שמע במצרים.
Vahadad Shama b'Mitzrayim. Now Hadad heard in Egypt. Notice this is an X-Qatal. It's not the next event that happens after what we just had. What did we just have here? After talking about his son being weaned. We don't know when this is. Some point later. Now Hadad heard in Egypt.
והדד שמע במצרים. כי שכב דוד עם אבותיו.
Kishachav David im avotav, that David had slept, had laid down with his fathers. That's an expression to mean he died. He's buried with his fathers.
וכימת יואב שר הצבא.
V'chimet Yoav sar hatzava, and that Joab had died. Joab who? The captain of the army. So David and Joab, he hears that David and Joab are both dead.
ויאמר הדד אל פרעה.
Vayomer Hadad el Paro. Hadad said to Pharaoh,
שלחני ואלך אל ארצי.
Shalacheni ve'elech el artzi. Shalach is to send. In the Piel, it means to release. So there's a Piel that's not really intensification. It's a little different. Shalach is to send. So if he had said it in the Cal, however you would have constructed that, Shalachni maybe, I'm not sure. I didn't look it up. It would be send me on a mission or something. But Shalacheni is release me from captivity, release me from obligations. It's a little different. Shalacheni, release me, ve'elech, that I may go to my land. How is Pharaoh going to feel about this? Artzi, that I may go to my land. Remember, Pharaoh gave him land, right? So why does he want to go to the land? Back in verse 18, and land ve'eretz natan lo, and land he gave him. Okay, so it's going to, for Pharaoh, we'll see. Let's read it. That's the next verse.
ויאמר לו פרעה.
Vayomer lo Pharaoh, Pharaoh said to him.
כי מה אתה חסר עמי והנך.
Okay. Shmuelov, some reason throws this, he reads it all together right to here. Kima ata chaser imi. Pharaoh said to him, why, we'll come back to talking about this in a moment. What have you lacked? Chaser is to lack. What have you lacked with me? V'chinecha.
מבקש ללכת אל ארצך.
V'hinecha mevakesh lalechet el artzecha, that behold, that look, you are seeking, mevakesh to seek, lalechet to go to your land. Why do you want to go to your land? What have you lacked here?
ויאמר.
Vayomer, and he said,
לא.
lo. He said, lo, no.
כי שלח תשלחני.
Ki shaleach teshalacheni. Again, Piel, we see the doubling there. We have an infinitive absolute, which intensifies or makes more strong whatever is going on in the main verb here. Okay, that's what infinitive absolute often does. So, no, you must release me. That's what he's saying. By the way, with this here, sometimes Shmuelov it's almost like he's a runaway train. He doesn't know when to stop. Let's listen to the other guy. See if I can get him here. Barry. What verse was this here? 22. Okay. So Barry.
ויאמר לו פרעה,
ויאמר לו פרעה,
כי מה אתה חסר עמי?
כי מה אתה חסר עמי? Right? He stops right here. What have you lacked with me?
והנך מבקש ללכת אל ארצך.
Right? והנך מבקש ללכת אל ארצך. When you're using the Bible reader, it's not a bad thing to listen to them both. Sometimes sometimes one makes a little mistake or something and the other one does a better job. Let's look at the key here. I said we'd talk about this. I didn't really translate it. We have two keys. We have one here and one here. I'll start with, okay, so one's blue, one's red. Okay, let's start with Kogan. Kogan talks about this. His translation, or the translation he's using, I'm not sure which, in his commentary, Pharaoh said to him, that's up here, Vayomer lo Pharaoh, what are you lacking with me that you want to go to your own country? That is the Vav here, okay? So he doesn't really translate the key. Pharaoh said to him, and he goes straight into this, what are you lacking with me? What are you lacking with me that you want to go to your own country? He said, Vayomer, lo, nothing. Okay, interesting. Lo meaning nothing, but do let me leave. Okay, so this key is but. Two distinct uses of the particle key can be noted, he says. In the first instance, key introduces the direct quotation. This here, that's why it doesn't translate it. It's like quotes. In the second one, following the negative is but or rather. So here's the negative. So this one, which follows that negative, is but or rather. It's an adversative use. Okay, no, but nevertheless, I don't lack anything. Okay, there's nothing I lack. However, you must release me. That's the use of the key here. There is a book. This is my second book I want to introduce you to, and this is Williams' Hebrew Syntax, and has been revised by John Beckham. Williams is at the university, or was at the University of Toronto. I don't know if he's still there. I don't know what time frame here. And John Beckham is at the Bethlehem Seminary in Minneapolis that came from John MacArthur's, or from not John MacArthur, from John Piper's church. So he's a prof there, and he edited this and made it really much easier to read, and added a whole bunch of footnotes. Here's the reference. Here's the ISBN. If you want to check it out, you can get it at Amazon or Toronto Press. Here is example of it. I should show you my version. All this is coming from, I just used my phone and took some pictures. This is my copy here. And I want to show you how it's constructed, but let me just give a caveat first. If you are a purist, you might get frustrated with this book, because he adds these little English bits. So causal key, and he gives because. And then temporal key gives when. It doesn't mean you have to always translate a causal key as because, okay? So take it for what it's worth. These are just examples. I really like them personally because I find this a bit abstract. Maybe I'm just not an abstract thinker, or I'm just not very sophisticated. I don't know. But it helps me to have an example. Just don't always translate. Just don't necessarily translate it woodenly that way when you see it in a verse. So, key. Williams' syntax is really nice because it's so clear what they do. So, for example, the causal key, they give an example, and it gives a little definition here. Key can begin a causal clause. They give a translation, or an example. They translate it. Because you have done this, italicize the key. And they also give it in Hebrew with an interlinear, which means you can quickly understand the examples. You don't have to go look up words if you don't know them, because it's right there. So it's really handy. A couple of examples, and they give a reference to another one. And they list the different usages. Now, what is his name? Beckham? What John Beckham did, he reformatted everything so it looks nice. It's easy to read. with these numbers for the entries. That may have been there before, I'm not sure. He also added footnotes. So if you want to dig deeper, these footnotes point you to all the different places in the standard grammars where this is discussed. So if you don't like how it's expressed here, you think they're wrong or simple or whatever, you can go dig deeper here. What I like about it in particular is that it quickly lays out the major options for some of these terms. So you have a causal key, because, you have a temporal key, when or as, conditional key, sometimes key is if, adversative key, sometimes it's but rather, but instead. Those are just examples. That's what we have in our verse, in that second place. I lack nothing, no, lo, but you must release me. Adversative key. Concessive key, though, in spite of, even if. It's words like this that I need a little bit of English help, right? Asservative key, certainly, indeed, truly. Resultative, with the result that. Nominalizing, okay, this is pretty abstract. You got to read through this to figure that one out. Key in a question, it is, it not, that is the case, okay? Certain questions, key can have a certain effect. And recitative key. This is introducing a direct quote, direct speech, also called the key recitativum. Okay, you can see this is old, this is Latin. The conjunction key can introduce direct speech, and that's what Kogan is saying is the key in the first instance in our verse. Here's a table of contents for those who want to see it. You can also see it on the web. He covers a whole bunch of things to do with nouns, nominals, and then syntax. The other complaint I saw about this is that in this section he mixes syntax and semantics of the verbs. That may well be the case. I don't know. I'm not at the point where I'm distinguishing that, or I don't know. I haven't seen it. But that may well be the case, so take that for what it's worth. And then he gives a list of particles. So you can look up all your prepositions, right? What are the different uses for al? Or for, where do we have asher here? Here, asher, right? We just translated one as because. Often it's who or that, okay? And then a section on syntax. So I think it's a really helpful book. And I'm going to be using it more as we go through videos. When you find something, we'll point to this and say, okay, here's an example of whatever. Now, let me see, before I do that, let me stay here. As I was preparing today for this, rereading my PowerPoints, I thought I would check one more resource on this, because I was struggling a little bit with this direct quotation. Vayomer lo Pharaoh ki ma'ata chaser imi. And the examples in Williams there fits this perfectly. But I remembered there is another book, this one here, and I don't have slides or anything with this, I'll just point it up. This is Cynthia Miller's book. Can you read it there? Okay. The representation of speech in biblical Hebrew narrative, a linguistic analysis. For books, I need my other glasses. By the way, I discovered that reading glasses are good for reading, but they're not good for computers because the screen's a bit far. So this is my computer glasses. I've got long distance glasses, computer glasses for arm's length, and reading glasses for something close. It was quite helpful to discover that. So I looked up. So Cynthia Miller has done this study, and she has looked at every single direct speech, indirect speech, or mixed forms of speech in the narrative sections of the Bible. So a ton of work. And she's cataloged them, so I figured she would say something about our verse. I looked it up, and in fact, she does. So I'm just going to read it to you. I don't think you're going to be able to see this. Maybe I'll just put it up in case. There it is. Maybe it'll come through. Okay, now I'll read it. She says, in combination with an interrogative, so in a combination with a question, key may be used in the second half of an agency, how do we say that? Agency pair, which it means is I think, a dialogue where you have two people speaking, one speaking and the other speaking. So in the context of a second half of a dialogue between two people, the key can be used to dispute the previous statement and request a reason or evidence for it. So verse 21, our previous verse, she translates as, Hadad said to Pharaoh, send me away so that I may go to my land. Okay, that's just the same way we did. Okay, send me away that I may go to my land. Our verse 22, Pharaoh said to him, and she translates the key as, for what reason? Okay, so not just direct quotes, just the quotation marks, but Pharaoh said to him, for what reason? What are you lacking with me? Okay, so she's saying that the key here is disputing what he had previously said, send me away. And he's saying, why? And then he asks. She also quotes this other guy, Zorell, Zorell, a German fellow, evidently. He says, Zorell understands the verse in this way and translates it, the key, as was denn, which is German. I just know a touch of German, not very much at all, but enough to read this. Was denn, what then? Okay. What then? What have you lacked with me? And the footnote, you can see in the footnote, Zorell, he wrote an article called Gibt es im hebräischen ein recitativum? Okay. Gibt es im hebräischen, is there in Hebrew a recitativum? Is there in Hebrew a key that acts as a quotation mark? So evidently, I haven't read the paper, it's probably in German. Is there in Hebrew a key that functions as a direct quote, as quotation marks, which is what Kogan is saying this is and what you see in Williams, and it's as old as the hills. So in this article, evidently this guy is questioning that and has a different explanation. Interesting. So you could look at key, where it appears to be quotation marks, and see if it is responding to what has just been said by the other speaker. I haven't read the paper. It'd be interesting. So key can do a bunch of different things, and sometimes it's disputed, and sometimes we're just not totally sure. But some of these resources can really help to sort this out and at least give you what the options are. And Williams I find really good for laying out the options, at least a start, and then you can dig deeper. Okay, this is a summary of where we are at, starting from verse 17 down to our verse. The account here, where it ends, where he says, Lo ki shaleach tishalacheni, no, nothing, I'm not lacking anything, but, the adversative use of the key, but you must release me, that's the end of the story. It's like dropping off a cliff. We know nothing more. Walsh, our literary critic, says, who's very sensitive to how stories are constructed, he says, strangely, the story ends there, right here. We are not told that Hadad returns to Edom, nor what he does once there. Even the fragmentary sentence in verse 25, which we'll see in a moment, does mention Hadad. It says the evil which Hadad did, and this is in context when it's talking about Rizon, the other Satan. So just mentions him in passing. He says that statement in 25 lacks any verbs to flesh out Hadad's career or to explain in what way he acts against Solomon. So we have no details. We just know it happened. What about the people Hadad's party brought to Egypt from Paran? What about those guys that picked up? What about his own, all the people that were with him? Whatever happened to his son, Ginuvat? Did his wife and son return to Edom with him? These are all interesting questions. But the narrator's purpose is clearly not primarily to spin a well-told tale about Hadad. No, that's not what he's trying to do. Another example, a very nice, very clear example, how authors can be selective, which we talked about at the end of the last video, or somewhere in there. John 20, John 21, right? John, the author of the book of John, says explicitly he's picked things for a purpose. And this is clear. This is, the story ends because it's not It's doing something other than just telling the story of Hadad. What is it doing? We've already hinted at that. You've probably already sensed what's going on here. But let's do a little bit of participant reference tracking, particularly looking at the actors who are acting, who's doing stuff, as opposed to who's having stuff done to them. In 17, it starts off, Vayivrach Hadad, okay, Hadad left, he fled, sorry, and V'Hadad na'ar katan, and Hadad was a young lad, okay? Then in verse 18, it's not Hadad, okay? We have the group of them. They arose, they went, they took, they arose, and then we have Pharaoh acting. He took, or he gave rather, and then he said, he appointed, and he gave. In 19, so from 18 we go over here to 19, Hadad found favor, very much favor in the eyes of Pharaoh. He's the subject, but he's not really acting, right? Very passive. He experienced grace, favor. And then we have someone else acting. Pharaoh gives him a wife, and we have Tahpenes, who in the next verse gives him a child, or the sister of Tahpenes, and Tahpenes weans the child, has him grow up in the house. And Givunat was, okay, so this is all, our Hadad is not really doing anything here. Until here. Now Hadad heard in Egypt that David had passed away and Joab had passed away, and then he says to Pharaoh, Hadad speaks to Pharaoh, then Pharaoh speaks to him, and then he speaks back, and that's where the story ends. Now, in this whole section here, which covers many years, Hadad is not really doing anything. He doesn't really act here in the story. Of course, in real life, he was doing all kinds of things. But the way the story is told, he's not driving anything. Others act on his behalf. All of this is his nurturing, his privileged upbringing, an outsider raised in the house of Pharaoh, right? Then he hears something about his own people, right? He hears some news from home or from things that affect his people, and he asks Pharaoh to let him go for the sake of his own people. Does all this sound familiar? His life, Hadad's life, parallels Moses, and the way it is written to parallel Moses. The types of details that are included, Midian, we think of Moses, Paran, they came through there, Egypt, receptive in Egypt, a son growing up in the household by the queen. I mean, all this stuff are echoes of Moses. And so it's not about what Hadad does, it's about what happens to Hadad that links him to Moses. Not every detail is the same, but clearly it's written in such a way as to make us reflect on Moses and to make a connection. What is the message? What is the message of this narrative? And that's always a question we should ask. Why is this story being told? And looking at how it's told helps us understand the purpose of narrative. You don't just want to take narrative and preach and just use it as a launching pad to say anything you want. You can do that if you want, but then you're the authority, right? Instead, we want to see what is the author telling us from this story. You need to see that in the Gospels. You'll sometimes find the same account in one Gospel and another Gospel, and they're being used to give a different message. And to understand what that message is, we need to pay very close attention to how things are written. The message, I think, here is that God has prepared Moses, in the same way that God prepared Moses, so God has prepared Hadad. Hadad is being put into the mold of Moses. Both were God's agents. This Satan, Hadad, is from God. And of course, we were told that directly by the narrator in verse 14. Vayakem Adonai Satan lishlomo. So before verse 17, we are told by the narrator explicitly that God has ordained Hadad as a Satan. It's God that's done it. It's not just him on his own will. And then now we get the story of Hadad. And the purpose of the story is not to tell us biographical information about Hadad, but to reinforce this point that God has appointed him. The story, the way the story is constructed, parallels the statement that we get directly. And when the story has served its purpose, it ends, even if it is abrupt. In fact, perhaps this abruptness is actually more effective. If they had gone on to tell us all these details that might be interesting, the purpose of the story, the message, may be a little harder to understand, maybe a little harder to see. So it just drops it off. It served its function, end. And that's why the count ends here.